Hello and welcome to Laoghaire-Rathdown Library's series of events celebrating Dublin, one city, one book. Tonight I'm your host, Martina Devlin, talking to Dwyer Hickey. Now these events have been delayed by 7 months. Originally they were scheduled for last April. We all know the reason for the postponement, but DLR Libraries was determined not to let the year end without holding something to mark this important annual initiative. So, it's a pleasure now to be here presenting them. We have 3 free online events in store for you, taking place on 3 consecutive Thursdays, all at 7 p.m. This is our first event. It's called Turning Ideas into Books. During it, I'll be discussing with Christine the inspiration behind her books and the research that goes into them, including Tatty, the 2020 One City, One Book choice, and her latest novel, The Narrow Land. But Christine has built up a substantial body of work, and we'll touch on other books she's written too. So, a little about Dwyer Hickey. Here she is. Christine, hi.
Hi, Martina. How are you?
Good. Christine has written 8 novels and a short story collection, including The Cold Eye of Heaven and Last Train from Liguria. Her most recent book is The Narrow Land, set in Cape Cod in 1950, which imagines an unlikely friendship between artist Edward Hopper, his wife Jo, and a 10-year-old German refugee. It won the Sir Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction earlier this year and the inaugural Dalkey Literary Award for Novel of the Year. Christine is also the author of a memorable novel, Tatty, the 2020 Dublin One City, One Book choice. And this imaginative citywide reading initiative comes under the remit of the Dublin UNESCO City of Literature Office, and it's great to see One City, One Book supported in other areas, including right here in Laoghaire-Rathdown, where I'm sitting. Christine, before we get going, tell us how you managed to do events for One City, One Book in the era of COVID. And we should have mood music at this point. The era of COVID.
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, it started out. It was at the beginning of the year. It looked like it was going to be an extremely busy year for me. The diary was just completely full. I think there was something like 36 events, maybe 30-something events anyway. Around Tatty and One City, One Book, and I was supposed to be going to London a few times and the States and Poland and Belgium and all sorts of things going on. And then COVID struck and that was the end of that. But I have to say that a lot of events still remained cancelled and are postponed. But thanks to One City, One Book and all the team there, they've been really, really terrific. They managed to get my big event online, which was called Music and the Imagination, and we'll probably talk about that aspect in a few moments. But it was an interview with Niall McMonigal, and it featured live music, and it was about how music affects creativity and inspires me and helps me to continue writing. And I was thrilled when that happened. It was a pre-recorded event, and I think it went very well. And you know, that's kind of what we've been doing. Zoom or just forgetting about it for the moment and hoping that at some stage we might be able to revive some of the events. But I was happy enough to get the one big event done anyway.
Well, it's funny you should mention music because we had some questions submitted, and there's one here from Marion in the DLR in Lexicon, and she says that she enjoyed that earlier talk where you discussed the importance of music as part of your writing process. And Marion asks, is there any particular music which is inspiring your work right now?
Yes, I'm listening to Telemann trumpet concerto quite a bit, and it's really because I think it fits in with the novel that I'm working on at the moment, although there's been a lot of distractions and stops and starts with this particular novel. But that's the one that would be the theme music, I think. When it comes to music, it works in several ways for me. One of which is that for every novel that I write, there tends to be a sort of, you could call it, I suppose, music to accompany it. If it was a film, it would be the music score, it would be the film score. And it means that while I'm away from my desk, where I think a lot of the creativity happens anyway, a lot of your ideas are processed and you work things out in your head. I listen to that music, usually when I'm in the car, if I'm around the kitchen, working around the kitchen or whatever. And somehow the subconscious manages to keep working. And often when I've left the desk full of knotty problems that I'm not sure how I'm going to fix them, when I go back, I find they've resolved themselves. So I use music that way. I'm aware, sorry, Martina, I'm aware that a lot of people have already watched the conversation with Niall on YouTube, so I don't want to go into it too much because I don't want to be repeating myself. But basically, that's
perish
one way I use
thought, Christine.
yeah. But, anyway, to answer your question, that is what it's a Telemann trumpet concerto. The novel is loosely based on a trumpet player, and a boxer, the two brothers, and it's set in London. And I just find the strength in that piece, and it's also quite plaintive and quite vulnerable, works for me. It just speaks to me, and hopefully we'll see that novel, those two magic words, the end, appearing sometime. But anyway.
Every writer's favourite two words, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
I sometimes write them. I sometimes write them just to encourage myself before I've reached the end, like practicing.
No, I couldn't do that. That's too cruel, because then I'd say, oh no, it's not true at all.
Oh, you're superstitious. You think it's bad luck, do you?
Yeah, kind of. But yeah, so I also think that when if we're going to talk about ideas and putting ideas into books, that people often ask us about where the ideas come from. I find music is a great way to open the imagination and to make you visualize. And because if you're writing a novel, I'm sure you'd agree with me, Martina, what you're really doing is you're painting a series of pictures with words instead of paint. And you have to be able to visualize, and you have to, your visual facility has to be, well exercised. And I think we stopped doing that in modern days with all social media and bombardment of information, advertising, and we don't really give our imaginations enough time to breathe and to work. So music helps it, I think, to relax a bit and to allow ideas in.
Has lockdown helped with finding space and time to unleash our imagination?
Yeah, I think probably with some people it depends. I certainly think time has become very peculiar. It's almost like the melting clocks, Dali's melting clocks, that I don't know where the days are going and how. At the beginning of lockdown, I thought we're never going to be able to, the days will be endless, but that didn't really happen. It's sort of, they just pass. And I don't know, I do find this lockdown, even though I find it a little bit depressing, I find that my imagination seems to be working maybe I'm just going mad. My imagination is working a lot better than it was on the previous one. I'm getting a lot more ideas.
That's kind of a key thing about ideas, isn't it?
Mm.
Deciding what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. I mean, because we get lots of ideas.
Oh, yeah.
But not all of them are worth persevering with.
No, and I don't think that any idea is in the beginning, just one idea. Because it's not getting the ideas. That's not the problem. As you say, we all get hundreds of ideas, thousands a day. It's what you do with the ideas. And do you leave them to settle? I like to, the way William Trevor talks about putting a short story in a drawer. I like to put an idea in a drawer in the back, in a little room in the back of my mind, and leave it there until a second thing happens to spark it off, or maybe a third thing happens. And that's how I do it anyway. I don't know how other people do it. I tend to do it that way. For example, because I mentioned the Narrow Land because this is what, this is my most recent one. That started with a story, which can, of course, spark ideas. We're all told stories all the time. That started for me with a story told to me at a dinner in Leipzig by a German man. And he was talking about children in Berlin just after the Second World War, the huge problem with malnutrition, and how the children were sent away on trains to farms to be fattened up. And that idea stayed with me. And when he told me the story, I said to him, do you mean like little piggies going off to the market? And he said, yes, that's exactly it. And just that phrase stayed with me, and it stayed in my head. And then sometime afterwards, I read something about President Truman, who had published a directive on misplaced people, and particularly in children. And he wanted the children brought from the camps. This is the war was over, but there was millions of people still in camps that had nowhere to go, and children in particular that nobody wanted or nobody owned. And so he wanted as many as possible to be brought to America to be adopted. And this was the second idea for me that sparked it off. And then it kind of built on from then, you know.
But is there a risk that you lose your ideas? How do you save them down? Do you write them in a notebook, or do you just have an amazing memory?
You can do that, but I think something, when an image is strong, I could see the little boy, and I could see him in his the clothes that were made out of old soldiers' uniforms. You know, soldiers that were dead, and they took the uniforms off them because the people in Germany had absolutely nothing, really had nothing after the war, and they weren't inclined to get much help from anybody. No, not many people were inclined to help them, so they had to make do with every single thing had to be put to purpose. And I think the boys, anyway, the soldiers' uniforms were scrubbed and mended and given to these children to wear. And I just that vision of the little boy sitting on his own in a train, traveling across this war-torn country. I didn't even have to write it down. That just stayed with me. And I knew somehow that I was going to write a novel about it. And that happens sometimes. It's a little gift that occasionally comes, but you have to allow it in. You know, you have to allow it in. You can write other ideas I write down, or I might write down a first sentence. Sometimes that will happen. First sentence is the hardest.
Yeah. Is there a first sentence that comes to mind that you've used, you know, that made its way through the edits and the rewrites?
Yeah, I'd say in every book, nearly, I would have a first sentence that somehow, or a short story in particular, I might have a first sentence and I remember it and I keep it. And when I'm teaching, like if I'm giving a class, quite often I will lend the class a first sentence just to get them moving, but they have to give it back. But what happens with people is that quite often the real first sentence is further down. It's further down the paragraph.
Yes. Yes.
The question of tuning your ear to recognizing it, you know. And it's not about recognizing, as you say, the ideas that could work are the ideas that you know instinctively are going to work, and the ideas that don't matter, but they could lead to something else.
Of course, some famous first sentences could quite easily be applied to lots of different books. I mean, the one that's most often quoted is perhaps it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I mean, you could say that about the year of COVID. You could say that about the year of Brexit.
Yeah,
you know,
you could. Indeed, you could. Yeah, but that was Charles Dickens. It suited the atmosphere, and it is the first sentence that holds up the second sentence and the third sentence within that atmosphere, within that mood. Yeah, they can be used again and again. Yeah,
a tale of two cities.
Yeah, tale of two cities. Yeah.
On the question of ideas, I've always loved Joseph O'Connor's analogy that it's like being in a taxi cruising with the light on. You're leaving yourself open to ideas. And he was suggesting that it's at a point in a writer's life, perhaps where they're between books or where they're just ready for an idea. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, and I like that he said that about the taxi, because I get a lot of ideas actually driving in the car and listening to music, because I think the movement of music and the movement of the car, there's something about that sort of opens your vision. I'm not suggesting anybody crashes their car or anything, but it just opens up your mind a little bit, and you notice things that you wouldn't normally notice, I think. the rhythm of life within the movement. I love listening to Mozart, for example, and the amount of people that you see that will walk in tune to the music is extraordinary. But it's a sense of trajectory, and it's a sense of movement and going from one place to another. And he's quite right. It's sort of like going from one going to there's a destination and you're in between, and you will think and you're just open to it. Yeah, but that's probably how he does it. I don't know when exactly I do it, but I get what he's saying. Yeah, I get what he's saying.
Mm-hmm. So it's one thing coming up with this idea. You know, I can see you at the dinner talking to the German man. Delivering it is another.
Oh yeah, well he stayed. The little boy stayed in my head, and he was having a great rest there for a couple of years. And then, as I said, the directive thing I said, so I knew I'd get him to America anyway. I knew immediately that President Truman's directive and the boy were connected, so he would be adopted into America. So I had that bit. And then I just happened to be in Cape Cod, and I got my location, because the location is pretty important too. And so you have your location, and you have to pick your year. So I knew it'd have to be after the Second World War, not too long afterwards. And I picked 1950. So then I just had to, so I had my location, my first character, and my year. And that's a great start when you're writing a novel. And after that then, a novel is a series of ideas that you have to link together, and you have to develop, and you have to make them count, and it has to become part of the fabric, the weaving of the story, if you know what I mean. And one thing leads to another, as I said. So in this case, what I did was I was in Cape Cod, and I knew when I saw the light, the searing light, and the atmosphere in this particular part of the Cape, which is very remote, I knew that somehow I was going to have to get the novel there. I knew also that Edward Hopper and his wife Jo Hopper lived there during the summer, and it's where they went to work and to have all sorts of rows. And
maybe tell people about Edward Hopper.
Yeah, well, Edward Hopper is the American artist Edward Hopper, who was sort of known as an artist of loneliness and light, and he's come back into the force since COVID very much, I think, very much so, because he's associated with isolation, and a sense of isolation and loneliness and being alone and being sort of away from the crowd and away from, just slightly outside of society, or being, not having much society. And he was very famous, but it took him a long time to get there. He sold his first painting when he was 30, and a second when he was 40. So that's quite a a gap. And he got married when he was 40.
Still better than Van Gogh, though, isn't it, per man?
Yes, yeah. That's true, yeah. But he was just one of those guys. But anyway, he married Jo Nivison, who was also an artist when they were both 40. And he started to become very famous then towards the end of his life, and very well known. She didn't become well known, and I became very resentful of it and angry and sort of bitter about it. She loved her husband, and she recognized that he was a genius, but in a way it was her tragedy that she was married to somebody that she wanted to have the same recognition, but she didn't actually have the talent to back it up, which was kind of sad. But anyway, I had to imagine my way into there. Sorry, just to get back briefly, they were part of Cape Cod. So I knew if my little American boy, or my little German boy had to come to Cape Cod somehow, he would see them on the side of a dune, maybe painting or something. He'd see them as a silhouette. That's all I thought about in the beginning, that they would be a cameo. They'd have a little cameo role. And then they just gradually took over the whole, they muscled in and took over the whole novel. So anyway, how was I to sort of imagine my way into their marriage? Well, I did it the usual research. I read biographies, and I watched about 1,000 times a documentary called Edward Hopper and the Blank Canvas, which was brilliant because I could hear their voices and I could see them. And then I looked at the paintings. So will I show you what they look like first? What Edward
Please.
I looked at photographs, got into the photograph, imagined my way into the photograph, and I imagined my way into the paintings as well. And then I came home, did all sorts of research, and then I went back to Cape Cod and I stayed there on the same beach. So that meant that I was able to soak in the atmosphere, the light, the remoteness, the strange atmosphere of the place, you know. So anyway, this is a picture of, can you see this now all right? Oh, should I go that way or that way?
Up a bit, yeah. And down there, perfect. No, up a little bit again. I feel like Bernie the Bolt here. Does anyone remember that the game show? Yeah, we can see there.
Mm. Okay. Now you know, he was 6'7" and she was 5 foot.
Up a bit, Christine. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So she's quite petite.
She was very petite. They were very opposite in many, many ways. He spoke very slowly and seldom. She spoke very quickly and spoke a lot. So so anyway, I was looking at this picture and looking into it and seeing the difference in the sizes and watching the documentary. And I knew already from my research that once they were married and once they met or got together, there was no other woman allowed to be his model ever. She was the model for all of his paintings. And yet in his paintings, the women are quite often, more often than not, tall and quite buxom, and they're clearly not her, you know? So I was kind of interested in that too. So anyway, I looked at 1950. I chose in 1950 as my year. So I'm going to show you another painting now. Now, if I can. Can you see this, Martina?
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Is that meant to be her? Is that meant to be her in the door?
Meant to be her. You see the girl, how tall she is. She nearly goes up to the top of the door. Yeah. So Jo Hopper, in her diary, writes about posing for that. You know, she'd say in her diary, oh, he made me stand in the doorway for 2 hours while he painted this, and I had to wear this skimpy old thing on me. And, you know, it's her as far as she's concerned. But I'm looking at it and thinking, it's more you know than it is me, you know. But anyway, I was interested in who this woman was. So I invented a story for her. So I opened it in 1950 with him, and he's driving around. He terrible difficulty finding a subject. And in 1950, he only did 2 paintings, and I'll tell you about those in a minute. But this one here was done in 1949. And what he's doing when he's driving around looking for inspiration is he's really looking for this woman. And he's remembering how he saw her in the doorway of the house the year before.
And she's just a random woman. He didn't know her. He just saw her and was inspired.
Her in the car, and he stopped, and she was arguing with somebody on the doorstep of the car outside the house, and the house was in a row of houses, but he isolated the house. Now in real life, when he did this painting, he built a little cardboard house to see where the light fell, and so I had this idea that I pulled the house out of a row of houses and put it down on its own so he could use it as a study. So anyway,
so he built a little. Sorry, Christine. He built a little mock-up version of this house that he was painting.
Yeah. He made a little model, little white house, and he put it on his table, and then he watched the light to see which way the light fell. So
and do they still exist, these models? Is there a museum where? Do they still exist? All these models? Did he save them?
I don't know if that model was saved. I've never seen it, but I knew it from the diary and from biographies that that's what he had done. You know, that he built a little. He was actually very good with his hands. He built furniture and he used to build things as well with his hands. So anyway, so that interested me, and I used that idea in the story as well. That gave me an idea. So when Jo Hopper befriends the little German boy, she shows him the little house and she tells him about the little house. And then she shows him mock-ups of the sketches of this painting, and he says, who's the woman in the doorway? Oh, why, that's me, she says. No, it's not, he says. I know that woman. And he does know the woman, because the people the woman is Catherine is in the house. Her hair is a different color now, and she's a bit thinner because she's sick, but anyway, she's in the story. So I use that way. And I'll show you another painting. This is called can you see it? Intersection at Organised. No, it doesn't look, it looks like a plain enough painting, but I used every inch of it. So I have Michael, my little German boy, coming up the road here. He comes up the road at the side of the Esso sign. You see there? Right now.
Just hold it in front of your face, Christine. Just hold it in front of your face.
Yeah, okay. So he comes up the side there where the Esso garage is. And he's walking a dog, a collie dog. And he sees under the trees Edward Hopper standing making sketches. But he doesn't know he's making sketches, but he doesn't like the look of him when he sees him. He's tall, he's Aryan looking, and this boy, remember, has come from Berlin, and he thinks he's a soldier. So he's just not sure what he thinks, but he's afraid of him. It reminds him of something. So then he goes down the road to the woman. You can barely see her. She's in a green dress standing under the awnings.
Just hold the picture up a bit, up that way, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
there's a
I
woman
can
in
see
a green
cars.
Yeah. Can you see the woman in the green dress? She's here.
No.
About here. There, with my finger.
Okay, hold the picture up higher.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I can see her now, yeah.
And he has a little boy has a conversation with the woman and tells her loads of lies. And she gives him a bag full of buns and a bit of cookies. So that all becomes part of the story. That becomes part of the story. So the last painting that Edward Hopper did that summer is the famous Cape Cod Morning painting, which is this one here.
Lovely colours. Lovely.
Yeah.
And is that Jo leaning out of the window?
That is like her. It's her face. That is like her.
Okay. Yeah.
So what I did with the novel was I brought the whole story of the novel towards that painting. That comes at the end of the novel. And I built the novel to come. That was the day. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew inch by inch it had to come to that painting. And she's watching out the window. In my story, she watches out. They've had a terrible row. She thinks he's left her. But then she decides she'll put herself together. She goes down down to the basement and she finds a nice pink summer dress that she always liked. She puts it on her, she fixes her hair, and she's watching out for him out that window. And then she sees him. So I kind of used that in it. So that's how I imagined my way in, and I got ideas from those different paintings.
So, Christine, it's cinematic, really. It's freeze frame, isn't it?
It is a bit. And I do think quite often that when you're writing a novel, it is about like making a film. You know, you can see it because you need your location, you need to do your auditions for what characters will and will not work, and your screenplay. And you need to make them do things. And I think when you have a location, your first character, and you walk them into the location, things happen. You allow things to happen. You have to stand back, of course. You put the camera. You have to stand behind the camera, and don't stick your nose in. Just let them at it for a while, and see what happens then. Yeah.
Well, it's the interaction between characters, isn't it? It's how the magic fizzles up.
Yeah.
Had you been a fan of Hopper's beforehand, or did you just discover how you went to Cape Cod?
No, I had been. I'd known his paintings before. Of course, there's the famous one, and the one that he grew to hate was, well, not hate, but the one that he began to dislike because it was the only one people mentioned was Nighthawks. The one where they're in the cafe bar late at night. Yeah. And
describe it to people who mightn't know that. We have it. I think even better.
A book, so I might have a flick through when I'm talking to you. I'll have a flick through. Nighthawks. I think that was painted.
Is it the diner?
The diner one, yeah. That's the diner one. So anyway, I have seen his. If I was in the States, I tried to see his paintings, and I've seen them as well in Oxford. There you can see it. That's Nighthawks. Joe incidentally thought of all his most of his titles for his paintings, which were always very good, the titles. This here, if you can see this side of there's a sketch. Sketch and
then finished.
Notes. He did a thumbnail sketch of every painting, and she wrote in notes about what he used, what paint he used, when it was painted, who was in it, and sometimes she changed the notes. If she missed something, she liked to be part of it. She called it being there at the conception. So she was very, very much a part of his creative process. On the one hand, and on the other hand, then she was given out because of her own, what she neglect, as she regarded,
And did it ever occur to you that she was correct, that she was in the shadow of a genius, or not?
It did occur to me. Of course, it occurred to me, and in a way, it would have been easier if that had been the case. But there was something that put doubt in my mind. I read a biography. And in the biography, sometimes she was adoring him to a ridiculous degree, and talking about how fantastic fellow he was, and what a genius he was, and what a wonderful husband he was. And the next minute, he was the biggest bastard under the sun, and she was saying dreadful things about him. And the tone, sort of the biography took her aside, I felt. Mm. And when I read the biography then a second time, because I'd seen the documentary quite a few times at this stage, and I found it hard to associate the man in the documentary with this man in the biography, which of course, that's okay, that can happen. People can be hypocritical and they can show a different side. But when I read the biography again, I noticed that all the negative stuff came from her diaries or her letters, but nobody else who knew both of them said anything bad about him. They had great respect for him and thought he was a very nice, gentle sort of a fellow. But they did say negative things about her being very possessive and keeping him away from people and trying to control his life and being, control his life. And that when anybody called to see him, she'd drag her paintings out and show them. She was very pushy about her work, which she wasn't. And he'd make him go and try and sell her work, and she was very, very pushy, and he was mortified, about these things himself. So anyway, but when I went and saw her paintings, you can see some of them are okay. They're okay. It would be of a standard you'd be happy if your art teacher, say your Leaving Cert art teacher had. You'd be very happy if they had that. But then to be an artist on that world stage, some of them are very poor. They're very mediocre. They're just sort of, they wouldn't be great, I could nearly do them myself type of thing. And so she didn't have the talent. I did try to do a Cape Cod morning. I tried to paint it. I took lessons and everything. I painted it myself, and I just couldn't even understand how he did it. And then myself and a professional artist, we painted it together, and we tried to work it out, because it looks as if, there's a lot of the geometric things there and all this kind of stuff. It all looks as if it's perfectly done, but it's sort of done to only his own rules. It's nearly impossible to copy it, I felt anyway. So, and she felt it too, and she's a professional artist. So anyway, so that's what you do. You just you try to imagine your way into the world you're trying to portray, because you can't touch any of your materials. All you have are words. So you have to try and get as close to it as you can. Staying in Cape Cod, boots on the ground did it, with the sea and the smell of the sea, and listening to the way people speak. And to me, the greatest compliment that novel got was when somebody American read it and said, yes, you got the tones and you got the Americanisms in it, and you didn't overdo it, because I was terrified of being, the way we hate the stage Irish thing.
Yeah.
I was terrified of the stage American thing.
So how did you get the idiom and the dialect correct? Did you just listen?
I just listened, and I watched a lot of old movies and listened again. And I
like old black and white films from the period.
Yeah, old black and white films.
Yeah.
Okay. Great fan of movies as well. He loved movies, and they spent a lot of time going to the cinema. So I was able to put that in as well. That was their main thing. He'd go to the cinema all the time. And light was his thing, just light, So that's
so was it a key thing for you being there, going to Cape Cod? I mean, do you feel you could have done as good a job having a rummage around in the internet and seeing it in a documentary?
I spent a small fortune buying books, buying things like the wildflowers of Cape Cod and the stars of the stars over, in that particular part of the world, and I learned all about all this, that, and the other. But you'd buy for 10 bucks 2 minutes in the place would make all the difference. It does for me. That's just the way I feel. I just feel, for me, it makes it, because I can pretend I'm there. And also, I found a lot of kind of interesting things while I was there accidentally. You can find things that will give you more ideas. For example, old newspapers. I love to read. I get ideas from old newspapers. Not necessarily reading the politics of the days, reading the advertisement, reading somebody's letter of complaint about something, or what's going on socially. So, in Provincetown is the nearest big town to Truro, where the Hoppers were, and that's where any social life would go on. And they have a Provincetown newspaper. So, in the 1950 version, I was able to read it as if I was reading it in 1950. It's not a microfiche, it was an actual old newspaper. I could turn the pages and read it. And I noticed that Labour Day weekend was coming up. It's a big weekend. They have a lot of parties and things going on. So I thought to myself, why won't I throw a party myself? I'll throw my own party, and I'll invite the Hoppers, and I'll invite everybody else who's part of the story. And it was a bit risky because it was a big cast to kind of control. But it was a way of getting everybody together, having an overview of them, and also of having a recap on the scenery and the mores of the day and that kind of thing. And got her into a few scrapes along the way. So I think it worked. I think it worked that way. Get her to interact.
Do you get very fond of your characters during the course of the novel, or are you glad to see the back of them?
No, I usually cry when I'm finished and worry about them. And there's one in particular, The Last Train from Laoghaire. And when I go to that town where it's set in Italy, in Bordighera, I kind of, it's like as if I'm coming home. I have to remind myself, these people didn't exist, you made them up. They're not actually real people. So, because I feel a connection, that sort of a connection. And Edward Hopper's not quite out of my system yet, I don't think. Probably because...
How does that manifest itself?
I think about him still. I still think about him. I've had a couple of dreams about him. And
what's happened in the dreams? And are they ideas for sequels?
No sequels. You see, I was always very iffy about writing about real people. I think it's kind of intrusive, and I don't like, because they're not there to defend themselves. And I never wanted to do it really. But it was just the way this novel happened. I ended up doing it, Judge Not and all that, and I ended up doing it myself. But I don't know. I felt a fondness for him in the end. I don't think his life was easy. I don't think her life was easy too, in fairness. But there was just some connection I made to him, I think.
And do you find yourself looking at the art now to pay tribute to him?
Well, I was going to say that to you, that when you go into a room, an art gallery, and one of his paintings are there, you don't realise how powerful they are until you're in the room with them. They're really, really powerful. I mean, there was an exhibition in Oxford a couple of years ago that I went to see, and it was American artists, and they had some very strong paintings there. And, they Georgia O'Keeffe and a lot of very well-known, very strong paintings. But his just shone out of the wall. There's just kind of quality that's not really captured in a book, but you really see it when you're in front of it, when you're in front of the painting.
I always think with a piece of art, it's almost like you're in the presence of the artist, because that artist touched and handled that piece of art. And in a way, they're all there in front of you.
Yeah, and it kind of came out of them. Like, he would take a little piece of something that he saw, a little piece of life, and he brings it into himself, and it becomes part of him, and then he brings it back out his turn of it. So it's a very physical thing as well, I think, is an emotional thing too. So that's how.
Well, Christine, you've explained to us how you came up with the idea for that novel. It makes perfect sense now. Talk to us about Tatty and how you were inspired to write that, and what kind of research you would have done, or did you take it all from your memory?
I didn't do any research, hardly any research. I don't remember doing any research for Tatty. Tatty took a long time to write, actually, even though it's my shortest book, because it was quite personal. It was sort of very painful to write it. But I
So
use
it's
my
about a
memory.
little
Yeah.
girl. It's about a little girl whose parents are very heavy drinkers, and she's watching that impact on the family. So it's the child's eye view.
Yeah, it's child's eye view of the marriage breakup, the watching the slow car crash of the marriage breakup. And she's not aware, or she becomes aware as the novel increases, because it's episodic, and she's 5, it's 4 or 5 when we meet her, and she's 14 when we leave her. And so the perception has to change. I mean, it had other challenges. It had the usual challenges, like the voice of a child and the perception of a child of a certain age. And that was all done, though, I think, through memory and through really trying to switch off and let the voice come itself, you know, and not think about it too much. I think all novels, in a way, are a balance between thinking about it quite strongly and not thinking about it at all, and letting it flow, you know. You can block yourself if you overthink things. And anyway, that's how that came. And I can't remember an awful lot about actually writing it. I do remember one thing, though. For one year of the years, coming up towards when it was really starting to take shape, not taking a drink, going to completely teetotal for a whole year, just to see what it was like to be the only teetotaler in the company. You know, like I was a child. And
what did you learn?
I learned a lot. There's a lot of bullshit talks, I can tell you that. But you learn, things like. No, we're not all going to Prague on a weekend. That was all just drink talk, you know, because you still leave it. I'd still leave the company believing everything that was said. And you forget that, all the amount of fantasies that happen when drink is taken. But, you know, it just gave me that little inkling, because if you're in a pub and you're having a drink and a chat, you probably don't notice what's going on around so much, you know. And I looked at the floor a lot when I was writing Tatty. Looked down at the floor, and I had to become a different height, and, you know, watch children, my own children, other people's children, watch them depending on what age they were, you know, to get the voice right. So that was that. That's how Tatty had to. That was all the work it really needed, and the memory.
But memory can be deceptive, can't it?
Yeah, but you're not in court. You're not doing it. You don't have to be totally accurate. You know, you can. Look, you know, the mind is just so open to suggestions, I think. And if you leave it open, you feed it enough suggestions, it'll turn it into a narrative. And this applies to everything, but in particular when it comes to creative writing. But my memory of my childhood is unusually vivid, I think. Even when I would mention something to adults who were, you know, adult when I was a child, they're always amazed that I can remember it so vividly. It is particularly vivid. And I think that is the case with a lot of writers. And often it's the case because there is some traumatic element to their childhood that made them more alert. You know, they didn't fully relax as children. They had sort of, I call it being on red alert, you know. You'd see it in the work, say, of Hugo Hamilton, different people like that, you know, that there was there's an eye for detail and a sense of that is really believable about their childhood, because it's one of the most difficult things to write about, I think, for people to get correct at the idea of a child and the essence of a child when they're an adult, when they look back. But
they take a lot in.
Yeah.
They take a lot in. I think we don't necessarily accept how much it's absorbing.
That they take in, yeah. And we sort of tend to make them a little bit cuter and more angelic than they actually are some of the time, you know. And but I think I like what Picasso said about all children are artists. It's just that most of them forget. When we grow older, we get, well, you know, we forget. But we are all artists when we're children. But anyway, so that's what happened there. I opened myself to the ideas of childhood and the ideas that I had when I was a child, and I used the circumstances are very much my own, like the schools and all that kind of thing are my own. And there were a lot of changes in it, though, like, you know. But anyway, I don't have any sisters, for example, and Tatty is too. And
So is that fulfillment?
That was kind of, no, it was really a novelistic choice because I felt there was too much on the shoulders of Tatty to make it. It just was leaned too heavy on one child. So I wanted to keep it more balanced. So I let our sister Jeannie be sort of another pair of eyes on the situation, because Jeannie talks to her, and it's another lens, a different camera angle. And then I have a brother who's special needs, but Tatty has a sister who's special needs. So I changed that. I don't know why, really. I just did change it because I suppose maybe because it was too painful to write about him directly. So I disguised him as a girl.
Well, I'm a great believer in plausible deniability.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I suppose. Well, Tatty couldn't be denied. I'm afraid I couldn't. I did my best to slither out of it, but anybody who knew. But so they're just different ways that different stories come, and sometimes.
Have you had the idea for a book that just has never properly materialized and has been nagging at you for years?
Yeah,
that hasn't been.
Yeah, I'd love to do a Western, and I'd love to do a detective novel as well. And sometimes I think of them, like I woke up this morning with a detective-y thing in my head, and but they're down the line. I've always got ideas for 2 more to do, but I have to immerse myself completely in one. I can only do one at a time. I can't really, even if I have to do a short story, I have to leave the novel.
Really? The detective one makes sense because you did a bit of detective work, didn't you, in the past?
Yeah,
for real.
That'd be a great. Yeah, I did. I did. I watched it. Well, it was just that we started a business, a legal agency business, myself and my husband, and we had an office in Bachelor's Walk overlooking the Liffey, which was very much in the atmosphere of, and Buckety stairs going up. It would have made a very good location for the detective thing. So we one of the departments, if you like, was detective work, and I did that with a pal of mine. It's actually quite boring in a lot of ways. There's a lot of listening to people pouring out their hearts and then going after people that, particularly when it comes to, I didn't do any spying on people in relationships or anything about adultery or that, but sometimes there was a couple of people that their husbands were gone and they really wanted the husbands back, but they were saying that there was no hope of getting them, They wanted to see what they were doing and why they weren't getting maintenance and stuff like that. I didn't do it for long, I have to say. I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it.
So it sounds a bit like gumshoe type work. I'm saying Humphrey Bogart here.
Yeah.
I'm seeing you in a
You see me in a I have a Mac. I will it the next time. Yeah. Anyway, it was a long time ago. But with that, I'm serving summonses. I did a bit of that serving summonses, which I used in The Cold Eye of Heaven. He's a summons server. But it's a fascinating world, the whole world of the courts and the detectives and the barristers and the solicitors and everything that goes around that. I like that world, and it's a world I knew. I know from my own family, from the work, that's involved in it. So all the ideas come in different ways, but you have to just let them come and hope for the best. And sometimes they lead to something and sometimes they don't. Like when we meet people at a party and sometimes we'll end up being friends with them and sometimes they really like them, but you never see them again.
Yeah, that's true. And do you always know if an idea is a novel or a short story or a play? Do you know what format it will take?
No, and sometimes some short stories, like if you look at Tatty, there was this short story before that called my very first thing that I won for the Story Writers Week, a short story about a little girl going to the races with her dad. And that was the precursor, I think, for Tatty. And then I was also working on a novel that was set about a guy coming home from India to Ballyfermot and looking at the 2 different things. And I had about 80 pages in and I had all the ingredients and I felt everything that I could do was done, but it just wasn't working as a short story. As a novel. And then I had a short story called The Fly Fisher, which was okay. It was good. It was okay story, and I put it into a drawer, and there was something missing. I didn't know what, but I left it there. And then I got this call from Joseph O'Connor saying he was doing the editing the Irish short stories for Faber, and would I have a short story? And instead of putting out the short story, I turned the novel into a short story about a guy coming home from India to go to a funeral in Ballyfermot. And I took the short story out, and I brought a little bit of the novel into it, just a very small bit of it into it, and it became The Cold Eye of Heaven. And the first chapter is that short story, more or less.
Okay. Interesting. And of course, some writers have amazing little short stories embedded in their novels. I'm thinking of Sheridan Le Fanu, a Dublin writer. The House by the Churchyard has an amazing ghost story just embedded within that novel. It's a narrative of the ghost of a hand, and it's about a disembodied hand. So, you know, I mean, it's actually had a life of its own beyond the novel. So, yeah. Well, listen, sorry.
No, I used to live in the house in Chapel Izzard. I lived in a house beside the church, but not beside the churchyard. And so it was
beside St. Lawrence's Church.
St. Lawrence's Church, yeah.
Yeah.
No, St. Lawrence.
So you lived next to this house.
Yeah, I lived next to the Catholic Church. I don't know. I can't remember if I called St. Lawrence's. St. Lawrence's, I think, is
Church of Ireland.
Church of Ireland. Yeah, but my kids went to school in the Church of Ireland school, so there was great spookiness going on, particularly this time of the year about the church, the scary stories and that. So it's very much part of my children's childhood, you know. Anyway, so you were saying something there. You were asking me.
I was asking, have you ever written any ghost stories yourself?
Kind of. Haven't published any of them though. Yeah, I have a few.
Why not?
I don't know. We did not finished. Sometimes I put some things that, you know, you think, oh, that's a great idea that William Trevor has, and you put them in the drawer and you forget all about them, and it's only years later. But I did come across a few stories that I had written years ago. I've come across during, you know, the cleanup. You get the first lockdown, you think, I'll do a big cleanup in the house, and it's the worst idea you ever had, because now you have twice as much of a mess in your house of things to be tidied away, you know. But I did come across one of them, one ghost story. I didn't really read it properly. I'll have another look at it though. Yeah, I'm very easily spooked.
Are you?
So I frighten myself. Myself. It's one of the reasons why I wouldn't do too much crime or something, because I think I'd be frightened myself. I'd be, you know, I get too involved.
Well, it doesn't have to be blood and guts crime. It can be psychological drama, can't it? Yeah. So, listen, Christine, we're running out of time, unfortunately. But it's been fascinating talking to you. I'm convinced you were a Shanachie in a previous life. Either that or a gumshoe. Thank you.
I don't know if that's a compliment, but I take it as one anyway.
Of course it is. Come on, a writer calling another one a Shanachie. Of course it's a compliment. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Next Thursday, the 19th of October at 7 p.m. again, Rosamond Taylor will continue the series with a special Poetry at the Lexicon event entitled Poetry, Childhood and Tatty, with poets Ethna Hand, James Harbour and Liz Quirk. Then on Thursday, the 26th of November, it's back to Christine and myself again, where we look forward to a discussion on the importance of location in the novel, not necessarily ghosty locations. And we'll be talking about this not only in relation to Christine's novels, but some of the other One City, One Book choices. So I do hope you'll join us again for that. Meanwhile, thank you to Christine Dwyer Hickey, and keep reading.
Thank you, Martina.
There's nothing like it.